Jake Miller kicked the quantum relay box and watched sparks fly from its damaged circuits. The box had been giving him trouble all morning and he was getting tired of its attitude. He grabbed a roll of electrical tape from his toolbox and started wrapping the loose wires together while muttering about government contracts and cheap equipment. Deep Space Communications Array in Nevada was supposed to be cutting-edge technology, but Jake knew better after 3 years of keeping this place running. He had learned that cutting edge meant held together with tape and hope. The scientists upstairs thought everything worked because of their brilliant design, but Jake knew the truth. Everything worked because he refused to let it break. Jake had been working maintenance since he got out of the army, and he had never met a machine he could not fix. His methods were not exactly standard, but they got results. When the quantum computer started overheating, he had rigged up a cooling system, using 3 desk fans and a garden hose. When the main power coupling failed, he had bypassed it with cables from his pickup truck. The place ran like a dream now, even if it looked like a junkyard from the inside. The morning sun was beating down on the desert facility. When the first alarm went off, Jake ignored it. Alarms went off all the time in this place, and most of them meant nothing more serious than a loose connection or a software glitch. He was more interested in getting the relay working before his supervisor Lisa Kane showed up and started asking questions. Lisa was a good boss, but she worried too much about following procedures. Jake preferred to fix things first and fill out paperwork later, if at all. His philosophy was simple. If it works, do not mess with it, and if it does not work, then make it work any way you can. The government might not approve of his methods, but they could not argue with his results. High above Earth, in the cold darkness of space, something was happening that would change everything. The Zephyrian Empire fleet had been traveling for months to reach this small blue planet. Their ships were massive constructs of metal and energy bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. The fleet commander, High Commander Vextar, stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled up. Humans were about to learn what happened to primitive civilizations that stood in the way of the Zephyrian Empire. Earth would fall within hours, just like all the others before the day was over. This world would belong to the Empire, and its people would serve as slaves in the great expansion across the galaxy. Vextar had conquered 17 worlds, using the same strategy first, his cyber warfare. Specialists would infiltrate and disable the enemy defense systems. Then his ships would move into position and demand surrender. Any world that refused would be destroyed as an example to others. The strategy had never failed because no primitive civilization could resist Zephyrian technology. The human defense systems looked pathetic from space. A collection of orbital platforms and satellites that appeared to be held together with primitive materials. Vextar scanning systems told him that some of the human equipment was over 50 years old and running on computational systems that belonged in a museum. This would be easier than he had expected. Techmaster Kilnoth began the cyber assault from his position at the hacking console. His fingers danced across holographic controls as he sent wave after wave of quantum viruses into the human networks. The viruses were designed to rewrite enemy systems from the inside, turning their own defenses against them. It was elegant and efficient, and it had never failed, but something was wrong. The human systems were not responding the way they should. Noth frowned as his viruses encountered networks that made no logical sense. The human computers seemed to be connected in impossible ways, with data flowing through pathways that should not exist. His sophisticated hacking programs kept getting lost in mazes of rigged connections and improvised solutions down in the Nevada desert. Jake heard his phone buzzing. He glanced at the caller ID and saw that it was Lisa. She only called when something important was happening or when something expensive was broken. He answered with his usual greeting, which was not exactly professional, but got the point across. Lisa's voice was tight with worry. The orbital platforms were showing anomalous readings, and the computers upstairs could not figure out what was happening. She needed Jake to check the communication links and make sure everything was working properly. Jake sighed and grabbed his coffee mug. It was going to be one of those days. Jake walked over to his monitoring station, which was a collection of mismatched screens and keyboards that he had. Assembled over the years, the setup looked like something from a science fiction movie from the 1980s, but it gave him more information about the inset system than the fancy displays upstairs. He could see everything that was happening in real time, and more importantly, he could fix problems before they became disasters. The readings on his screens were definitely strange. There was a lot of activity on the orbital defense network, much more than usual. It looked like someone was trying to hack into the system, but the attempts were being blocked. Jake was not surprised. The network was so patched and modified that even he sometimes forgot how everything was connected. An outside hacker would have no chance of figuring it out. Up in space, Vextar was getting impatient. His cyber warfare team had been working for over an hour and the human defenses were still active. In fact, they seemed to be getting stronger. His scanners showed that more orbital platforms were coming online and their weapon systems were charging to full power. This was not how conquests were supposed to work. Noth reported that the human networks were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They appeared to be running on a combination of obsolete protocols and custom modifications that defied all logic. His viruses could not find standard entry points because the humans did not seem to use standard anything. The whole system looked like it had been built by someone who had never read a technical manual. Vextar decided to try a different approach. If cyber warfare would not work, then he would use brute force. He ordered his ships to move into attack position and prepare for a direct assault. The orbital platforms would not be able to withstand the firepower of a full Zephorian battle fleet. The first wave of alien missiles streaked toward Earth defense platforms. Jake saw the attack on his monitors, and his eyes widened. The readings were off the charts, showing incoming projectiles that were definitely not from any human source. He grabbed his radio and tried to call Lisa, but the line was busy. He was going to have to handle this himself. The orbital platforms responded automatically. Their targeting systems locked onto the incoming missiles and opened fire. The response was swift and accurate. Every alien projectile was destroyed before it could reach its target. Jake watched the display with growing amazement. His improvised defense network was working better than anyone had ever expected. Vextar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His missiles had been destroyed by weapons that his computers claimed were impossible. The human orbital platforms were firing with precision that exceeded his own ship's capabilities. How could a primitive civilization have such advanced targeting systems? The truth was that the targeting systems were not advanced at all. They were old military computers that Jake had modified with parts from video game systems and cell phones. The combination gave them processing power and response time that exceeded their original specifications by several orders of magnitude. Jake had not been trying to build super weapons. He had just been trying to make old equipment work better. As more alien ships moved into position, Jake realized that this was not a drill. Earth was under attack by actual aliens, and somehow his jury-rigged defense network was the only thing standing between humanity and conquest. He took a long drink of coffee and cracked his knuckles. It was time to show these aliens what human engineering could do. Colonel Amy Torres stared at the screens in the NORAD command center, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The orbital defense platforms were reporting successful engagement with unknown hostile forces, but according to every official document, half of those platforms should have been offline for scheduled maintenance. The numbers did not add up, and that made her nervous. Her communication officer handed her a report that made things even more confusing. The platforms were not just online. They were performing better than their original specifications indicated. The targeting accuracy was beyond anything in the technical manuals, and the response time was faster than should have been possible with the installed hardware. Amy had been in the military long enough to know that equipment did not just magically improve itself. Dr. Pete Jackson arrived at the command center, carrying a tablet full of sensor data. As the military top xenotechnology specialist, he had been called in to analyze the alien technology they were facing. His first look at the data told him that humanity was dealing with a civilization far more advanced than Earth. The alien ships used energy sources that human science barely understood, and weapons that could destroy cities. But the more Pete studied the engagement reports, the more confused he became. The alien ships were losing. The human defense platforms were not just holding their own, they were winning decisively against technology that should have been centuries ahead of anything humans could build. It made no sense according to everything he knew about physics and engineering. Amy decided she needed answers. She ordered her staff to trace the communication links back to their source and find out who was actually controlling the orbital platforms. The answer came back within minutes. The control signals were originating from a maintenance facility in Nevada, run by a single technician named Jake Miller. Amy had never heard of him, but she was about to make his acquaintance. The helicopter flight to Nevada gave Amy time to think about the situation. Alien ships were attacking Earth, and somehow a maintenance worker was running the defense. The official chain of command seemed to have been bypassed completely, and the person saving humanity was not even a commissioned officer. Amy did not like situations where she did not understand the chain of command. Jake was elbow deep in a control panel when the military helicopter landed outside his facility. He heard the rotors but did not pay much attention. Military aircraft flew over the area all the time, and he had work to do. The quantum relay was still giving him trouble, and he was determined to fix it before the aliens tried another attack. Colonel Torres walked into the facility, followed by Dr. Jackson and a small security team. She expected to find a high-tech command center full of sophisticated equipment. Instead, she found what looked like the workshop of a particularly creative mechanic. Computer equipment was stacked on workbenches and connected with cables that seemed to follow no logical pattern. Tools were scattered everywhere, and the air smelled like coffee and electrical components. Jake looked up from his work and saw the military uniforms. He sighed and wiped his hands on a rag. He had been expecting this visit ever since the alien ships showed up. Military people always wanted explanations for things that worked, even when they did not understand how or why. Jake was not good at explanations, but he was willing to try. Amy introduced herself and asked Jake to explain how he was controlling the orbital defense platforms. Jake scratched his head and looked around the room. The honest answer was that he was not really controlling them. He had just modified the systems so they could work better than the original designers had intended. The platforms were basically running themselves now. Jake led the group over to his monitoring station and started explaining how the network operated. He pointed to screens showing data from dozens of orbital platforms, each one running slightly different software and connected through pathways that he had created over months of careful modification. The system looked chaotic, but it worked, and that was what mattered. Dr. Jackson studied the setup with growing amazement. The modifications Jake had made should not have been possible with the available hardware. The quantum processing units were connected to gaming computers, which were linked to military satellites through civilian communication networks. It was like someone had built a spaceship using parts from a hardware store. Me asked the obvious question: how had Jake managed to bypass all the security protocols and safety systems that were supposed to prevent unauthorized modifications? Jake shrugged and explained that most of those systems were designed to stop people who followed the rules. He had never been very good at following rules. The truth was that Jake had been modifying the orbital platforms for over a year. Every time something broke or performed poorly, he found a way to make it work better. He replaced expensive military processors with consumer electronics that had more computing power. He bypassed safety systems that slowed down response times. He connected systems that were never designed to work together. Pete wanted to understand the technical details. He asked Jake to explain how the targeting systems could be so accurate when they were running on hardware that was not designed for precision weapons control. Jake walked over to a workbench and picked up what looked like a modified game controller. Jake explained that the targeting computers were originally designed in the 1990s, and they were slow and clunky. He had replaced their processors with chips from modern gaming systems and added neural network software that he had downloaded from the internet. The combination gave the platforms targeting capabilities that exceeded anything the military had ever built. Amy was starting to understand why the alien cyber attacks had failed. The orbital defense network was not a single integrated system, it was a collection of individual platforms, each running customized software and connected through improvised communication links. There was no central control system for the aliens to hack, because Jake had never built one up in space. High Commander Vextar was facing his first major defeat in 20 years of conquest. His ships had been unable to penetrate the human defenses, and his cyber warfare specialists were reporting complete failure. They could not understand how a primitive civilization had developed such sophisticated countermeasures tech. Master Kilnoth had spent hours trying to map the human network topology, but every time he thought he understood how it worked, he would discover new connections that made no neurological sense. The humans seemed to have built their defenses without any regard for standard engineering principles. It was like trying to hack a system designed by someone who was insane. Vextar decided to make direct contact with the humans. He would demand to speak with their military leaders and negotiate their surrender. Even primitive civilizations usually recognized when they were outmatched. The humans would realize that continued resistance was futile and agree to serve the Empire. The communication request came through Jake monitoring system as a priority alert. He answered it the same way he answered all calls, by asking what was broken and how urgent it was. The voice that responded spoke perfect English, but had an odd accent that Jake did not recognize. High Commander Vextar introduced himself as the leader of the Zephyrian Empire fleet and demanded that Earth surrender immediately. He explained that resistance was futile and that continued fighting would only lead to the destruction of human civilization. Jake listened to the speech while eating a sandwich and occasionally making comments. Jake was not impressed by threats from alien commanders. He had heard similar speeches from military officers and government inspectors, and none of them had ever followed through on their promises. He told Vextar that if he wanted Earth to surrender, he would have to go through the proper channels and fill out the appropriate paperwork. Their conversation went downhill from there. Vextar was not used to being treated with disrespect by primitive beings. He demanded to know how the humans had developed such advanced defenses. Jake explained that the defenses were not advanced, they were just well maintained. He had simply fixed all the problems that the original designers had been too lazy to address. Vextar asked how a single maintenance worker could have defeated the cyber warfare capabilities of an entire empire. Jake thought about it for a moment, and then explained that he had never tried to build anything sophisticated. He had just connected things that worked and bypassed things that did not. The aliens were probably looking for complexity where none existed. As the conversation continued, Jake started making suggestions for how the aliens could improve their own technology. He pointed out that their ships seemed to be over-engineered, and suggested that they could probably achieve better performance with simpler designs. He offered to send them some technical manuals if they were interested by the end of the call. Vextar was more confused than angry. He had expected to negotiate with military leaders or government officials. Instead, he had spent an hour listening to maintenance advice from someone who seemed to think that duct tape was a legitimate engineering material. The human was either completely insane or far more dangerous than he appeared. Jake hung up the communication link and went back to work. He had promised the alien commander that Earth defenses would be even better by tomorrow, and he intended to keep that promise. He had some ideas for improvements that would make the orbital platforms more effective. The aliens had given him excellent motivation to test his theories. Dr. Rachel Stone arrived at the Nevada facility with a team of quantum physicists and a head full of questions. As one of the leading experts in theoretical physics, she had been called in to study Jake modifications and determine how they worked. The preliminary reports suggested that he had somehow violated several fundamental laws of physics, which should have been impossible. Rachel expected to find sophisticated equipment and carefully planned experiments. Instead, She found Jake welding a car battery to what appeared to be a quantum processor while humming an old rock song. The whole setup looked like something from a mad scientist movie, but the energy readings were off the charts. Jake looked up from his work and noticed the team of scientists studying his equipment. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked over to greet them. Rachel introduced herself and explained that she was there to understand the theoretical principles behind his modifications. Jake scratched his head had admitted that he was not sure there were any theoretical principles involved. Jekyll asked Jake to explain how he had connected quantum processors to classical computers without causing decoherence. Jake led her over to a workbench covered with electronic components and pointed to a device that looked like a toaster connected to a supercomputer. With jumper cables, he explained that the toaster was actually a quantum field stabilizer that he had built from spare parts. Explanation made no sense to Rachel. According to quantum mechanics, the setup should not work. The quantum states should collapse the moment they interacted with classical information processing. But the device was clearly functioning and producing results that exceeded theoretical maximums. Jake shrugged and suggested that maybe the theories were incomplete. Jake showed Rachel his latest project, which was a targeting computer built from gaming hardware and kitchen appliances. The system was processing quantum calculations using algorithms that he had written himself, based on nothing more than trial and error. Rachel studied the code and realized that Jake had accidentally discovered several new mathematical principles. Meanwhile, up in space, the Zephyrian Empire was preparing to deploy their ultimate weapon. The reality hacking virus was a piece of software so advanced that it could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics within a localized area. It had never failed to disable any civilization defenses because it attacked reality itself, rather than just computer systems tech. Master Kilnoth loaded the virus into the most powerful transmitter in the fleet and aimed it at Earth. The virus would seek out the core processing systems that controlled the human defenses and rewrite the mathematical constants that made their weapons function. Once the virus took hold, the orbital platforms would become harmless chunks of metal drifting in space. The virus reached Earth communication, NETWORKS, and immediately began searching for target systems. It found the human defense network and started analyzing its structure. What it discovered made no sense. The network appeared to be running on mathematical principles that should not exist and connected through pathways that violated basic logic. The virus tried to rewrite the quantum field equations that controlled the human weapons but encountered something unexpected. The equations were already wrong, according to standard physics, but they worked anyway. The virus spent processing cycles trying to understand how incorrect mathematics could produce correct results. Down in Nevada, Jake noticed unusual activity on his monitors. The quantum processors were running hotter than normal, and some of the displays were showing error messages that he had never seen before. He grabbed his toolkit and started checking connections, looking for the source of the problem. Rachel watched Jake work and realized that he was troubleshooting a system that should not exist. The quantum coherence was maintaining itself through connections that violated uncertainty principles, but Jake was treating it like a normal engineering problem. He tested voltages, checked signal strength, and replaced components without any regard for theoretical limitations. The reality virus encountered Jake LATEST modification, which was a quantum computer running off a coffee machine power supply. The virus tried to analyze how a beverage dispenser could provide stable power to quantum processors, but the mathematics made no sense. The coffee machine was somehow generating energy states that were not possible according to known physics. Jake noticed that his coffee machine was making strange noises and producing coffee that tasted different. He opened the machine and found that some of the wiring had changed color. The quantum field from his processors was apparently affecting the coffee brewing process, but the coffee was actually better than before, so he decided not to fix it. The virus continued its attack, trying to find some part of the human network that followed Standard physical laws. Every system it encountered was built from impossible combinations of technology held together with materials that should not work. The entire network seemed to operate on the principle that if something worked, then the theory must be wrong. Hi, Commander Vextar received reports that the reality virus had been deployed successfully, but the human defenses were still operational. His technicians reported that the virus was functioning but could not find valid targets because the human systems did not appear to follow any recognizable laws of physics. Vextar decided to contact the human maintenance worker again. He needed to understand how a primitive civilization had developed technology that could resist reality manipulation. Jake answered the communication with his usual casual greeting and asked if the aliens were having computer problems. The conversation that followed was unlike anything in Vextar military experience. Jake listened to descriptions of the reality virus with genuine interest, and then offered suggestions for improving its effectiveness. He pointed out that the virus was probably looking for standard system architectures, and suggested that it might work better if it was designed to handle custom modifications. Jake explained that he had learned early in his career that most problems came from trying to make things work the way they were supposed to, instead of the way they actually worked. He had stopped worrying about theoretical limitations years ago and focused on practical results. Vextar asked how Jake had managed to build quantum computers that violated fundamental physics. Jake thought about it for a moment and then explained that he had never tried to build quantum computers. He had just connected things that seemed like they should work together and ignored the parts that did not make sense. The alien commander requested technical specifications for the human defense systems. Jake offered to email him some documentation, but warned that most of it was handwritten notes and sketches. He had never been good at formal documentation, but he could usually remember how things were supposed to work. As the conversation continued, Jake started asking questions about Zephyrian technology. He was curious about how their reality virus worked, and whether it could be used for practical applications like fixing broken equipment. The alien explanations were fascinating, but Jake thought their approach was too complicated. Jake suggested that instead of trying to rewrite reality, the aliens should focus on working with whatever reality they had. He offered to show them some techniques for building systems that worked regardless of theoretical limitations. The key was to stop worrying about why things worked and focus on making them work better. By the end of the call, Vextar was questioning everything he thought he knew about technology the human had offered to help improve Zephyrian systems using principles that should not exist but clearly worked. The maintenance workers seemed to think that violating physics was just another engineering challenge. Jake went back to his modifications with renewed enthusiasm. The alien virus had given him some interesting ideas for improving his quantum processors. He started sketching plans for a new targeting system that would use reality manipulation principles combined with spare parts. From his workshop, Rachel Stone watched Jake work and realized that she was witnessing the birth of an entirely new branch of physics. Jake was not trying to understand the universe, he was trying to fix it, and somehow that approach was producing results that conventional science could not explain. The reality virus continued to circulate through human networks, unable to find anything normal enough to attack. It had been designed to exploit logical systems, but Jake modifications were built on organized chaos. The virus finally gave up and crashed after trying to understand how a microwave oven was providing input to a quantum supercomputer. High Commander Vextar sent an emergency message to the Galactic Hegemony, requesting immediate reinforcements. He reported that Earth represented an unprecedented technological threat that required the full attention of the Empire Science Council. The humans had somehow developed defenses that violated known physics, and their primitive appearance was clearly a deception. The hegemony response was swift. A massive fleet of over 200 ships began moving toward Earth, carrying the most advanced weapons and cyber warfare systems in the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Kethvar personally took command of the operation, determined to end the human threat before it could spread to other systems. Meanwhile, Jake had been busy working with a growing team of helpers Marine Sergeant Carlos Vega had arrived with a squad of technical specialists, and Air Force Captain Susan Lee had brought communications equipment from 3 different bases. Jake was delighted to have people who understood the difference between fixing things and following procedures. Jake explained his latest project to the military team. He had been thinking about the alien communication systems and realized that Earth was being too passive in its defense strategy. Instead of just shooting down alien missiles, they should be taking control of alien ships and turning their own weapons against them. Stringent. Vega asked how they could possibly hack alien technology that was centuries ahead of human development. Jake grinned and pointed to his workbench, where he had been reverse engineering pieces of alien technology that had been recovered from destroyed ships. The alien systems were sophisticated, but they followed logical design principles, which made them vulnerably. Jake had discovered that alien technology was built with the assumption that all other civilizations would use similar design philosophies. The Zephyrians expected to encounter standardized protocols and predictable system architectures. They were not prepared to deal with human creativity and improvisation. Captain Lee studied Jake's plans for weaponizing civilian infrastructure. His idea was to turn every communication satellite into a targeting beacon, and every weather monitoring station into a weapons control system. The International Space Station would become a mobile command center capable of coordinating attacks across the entire solar system. Dr. Rachel Stone had been working with Jake to understand the theoretical principles behind his modifications. She was beginning to realize that Jake had accidentally discovered that reality was much more flexible than anyone had previously believed. His systems worked because he refused to accept limitations that other engineers took for granted. Jake's newest creation was a quantum field manipulator built from washing machine parts and rare earth magnets. The device could theoretically alter gravity in a localized area, but Jake was using it to improve the accuracy of orbital weapons. The mathematics made no sense, but the results were undeniable. The alien reinforcement fleet arrived to find that Earth defenses had somehow grown stronger during their journey. The orbital platforms were more numerous and their weapons were more powerful. Scans revealed that the humans had weaponized their entire civilian infrastructure, turning communication satellites and weather monitors into components of their defense network. Fleet Admiral Kethvar had never encountered anything like the human defense strategy. His intelligence reports suggested that the entire system was controlled by a single maintenance worker, assisted by a small team of technicians. It seemed impossible that such a primitive command structure could coordinate defenses across an entire planet. Jake was monitoring the arrival of the alien fleet from his expanded command center, which now included workstations for his military assistants. The new ships were larger and more heavily armed than the first wave, but Jake was not impressed. Size and firepower were not everything in space combat. Jake had been studying alien tactics during the lull between attacks, and he had noticed some interesting patterns. The aliens relied heavily on overwhelming force and standardized attack formations. They seemed to expect their enemies to fight according to predictable strategies, which gave humans a significant advantage. Sergeant Vega coordinated the ground-based teams, while Captain Lee managed communication between orbital platforms and surface installations. Jake focused on real-time modifications to the defense network, adjusting weapon systems and targeting algorithms based on alien behavior patterns. The battle began when Kethvar ordered a massive bombardment of Earth orbital defenses. He expected to overwhelm the human platforms through sheer volume of fire. Instead, he discovered that human weapons seemed to get more accurate as the engagement intensified. Jake had implemented what he called aggressive response scaling, which meant that the defense systems became more effective as they encountered stronger opposition. The targeting computers were programmed to learn from enemy tactics and adapt their responses in real time. The more ships the aliens sent, the better Earth defenses became at destroying them. Darstone watched Jake work during the battle and realized that he was not just operating the defense systems, he was improving them. The stress of combat was driving him too make modifications that pushed his equipment beyond all theoretical limits. His quantum processors were running calculations that should have been impossible. Jake commentary during the battle was broadcast on open communication channels running commentary on alien tactics and human responses. His observations were increasingly sarcastic as the aliens failed to adapt to human defensive strategies. He pointed out tactical errors and suggested better approaches with the casual tone of someone critiquing a sporting event fleet. Admiral HFY listened to the human broadcasts with growing frustration. The maintenance worker was treating the battle like a technical problem to be solved, rather than a life-or-death struggle. The humans showed no fear of superior alien technology, and seemed to think that Zephyrian tactics were poorly planned. An asset administrator, Kevin Clark, arrived at the Nevada facility to formally recognize Jake's contributions to planetary defense. He found Jake working on plans for a new weapon system that would turn the Hubble Space Telescope into a precision sniper rifle capable of targeting individual ships from across the solar system. Jake explained to Administrator Clark that he was tired of playing defense and wanted to take the fight to the aliens. His modifications had given Earth the ability to destroy alien ships, but he thought they should be capturing them instead. Enemy technology could be reverse engineered and used to improve human defenses. The battle continued for 18 hours, with wave after wave of alien ships attacking Earth defenses. Jake's team worked around the clock, making real-time modifications to weapon systems and developing new tactics. The aliens were learning from their failures, but humans were learning faster. Captain Lee reported that civilian radio operators around the world were volunteering to help coordinate the defense. Amateur radio enthusiasts were providing communication links between remote sensor stations and Central Command. Jake was delighted to have additional help from people who understood that making things work was more important than following procedures. Jake's latest modification was a targeting system that used crowd-sourced data from civilian telescopes and camera phones to track alien ship movements. The system allowed anyone with a smartphone to contribute to Earth defense by reporting alien activity. The collaborative approach gave humans better situational awareness than any military system. By the end of the battle, Earth had not only survived the alien assault, but had captured several enemy ships and destroyed dozens more. The orbital defense network was stronger than ever, and Jake had proven that human engineering could overcome any alien technology fleet. Admiral HFY retreated with the surviving ships to regroup and plan a new strategy. He sent a detailed report to the Galactic Hegemony, describing human capabilities and recommending extreme caution in future engagements. The humans had demonstrated that primitive appearance could hide devastating effectiveness. Jake celebrated the victory by designing an even more ambitious project. He wanted to create a planetary defense grid that would protect not just Earth, but the entire solar system. His plans involved using captured alien technology combined with human improvisation to build weapons that would make any future invasion impossible. Dr. Stone realized that Jake's work represented a fundamental shift in how technology could be developed. Instead of trying to understand the universe and work within its limitations, humans could apparently modify reality itself to suit their needs. Jake had accidentally discovered that engineering was more powerful than physics. The Galactic Hegemony Supreme Council met in emergency session to discuss the Earth situation. Fleet Admiral HFY report described human technology that should not exist and defensive capabilities that violated fundamental principles of warfare. The Council voted unanimously to send the largest invasion fleet in hegemony history to deal with the human threat war. Master HFY personally commanded the Supreme Fleet, consisting of over 500 ships, carrying planet-killing weapons and reality manipulation devices. He had never lost a campaign in 30 years of conquest, and he was not about to let a primitive species damage his reputation. The humans would surrender, or they would be destroyed. Jake spent the preparation time networking with maintenance engineers and amateur inventors around the world. He used social media and ham radio networks to connect with people who shared his philosophy that anything could be fixed with enough creativity and determination. The response was overwhelming. Garage mechanics in Detroit contributed ideas for improving weapons, targeting systems. Radio operators in Japan developed communication protocols that could not be jammed. Amateur astronomers in Australia provided telescope networks for tracking alien ships. Farmers in Iowa offered to convert their equipment into defensive installations. Jake was amazed at how many people were willing to help defend Earth. Jake coordinated the global effort from his Nevada facility, which had grown into a sprawling complex of workshops and communication centers. Military personnel worked alongside civilian volunteers, creating an atmosphere that was part research laboratory and part community garage sale. The combination of official resources and grassroots innovation produced remarkable results. Dr. Rachel Stone had given up trying to understand the theoretical principles behind Jake's work and was now focused on helping him achieve practical results. She coordinated teams of physicists and engineers who were learning to build equipment that worked despite violating known laws of science. The new approach was producing better results than conventional research. Sergeant Carlos Vega managed the military aspects of the defense preparation, working with units around the world to integrate civilian innovations into official defense systems. Captain Susan Lee coordinated global communications, ensuring that volunteers in remote locations could contribute to the collective effort. Jake's latest project was a planetary defense grid that turned Earth into what he described as a planet-sized booby trap. The system integrated military hardware with civilian infrastructure, creating a network that could respond to threats from any direction. Every major city had weapons systems hidden in plain sight, and every communication satellite was capable of targeting enemy ships. The Supreme Fleet arrived expecting to find a world in chaos. Instead, they discovered that Earth defenses had grown exponentially during the preparation period. Scans revealed weapons emplacements in locations that should have been impossible to fortify. The humans had apparently turned their entire planet into a fortress. War Master Kethvar had studied the reports from previous engagements and thought he understood human tactics. He expected the maintenance worker to rely on improvised modifications and jury-rigged equipment. The Supreme Fleet carried systems specifically designed to counter unconventional approaches. Jake monitored the alien fleet arrival with calm confidence. His global network was ready, and his weapon systems were performing better than ever. The aliens were about to learn that human determination was more powerful than alien technology. The size of their fleet just meant that Earth defenses would have more targets. The final battle began when Kethvar demanded Earth immediate surrender, threatening to destroy the planet rather than continue losing ships to impossible human weapons. Jake's response was to demonstrate Earth's newest defensive capability, the gravity manipulator he had built from washing machine parts and applied physics violations. Jake activated the gravity weapon and relocated several alien battleships to a nearby asteroid field. The ships were not destroyed, but they were suddenly surrounded by rocks. Instead of empty space, the alien crews found themselves trying to navigate through debris fields that had not existed moments before. War Master Kethvar demanded an explanation for how humans could manipulate gravity on such a massive scale. Jake explained over open communication channels that he had stopped worrying about whether things were possible and focused on making them work. The key was to ignore theoretical limitations and concentrate on practical results. The battle continued with Jake providing running commentary on alien tactics while making real-time improvements to Earth defenses. His global network of volunteers contributed ideas and modifications that were implemented within minutes. The collaborative approach gave humans an overwhelming advantage in adaptability. Jake demonstrated weapon after weapon that should not have existed, but worked perfectly. Orbital platforms that fired bullets that could navigate through space, communication satellites that could generate electromagnetic pulses, weather monitoring stations that could create localized gravity anomalies. The entire planet had become a weapons system. Var realized that he was not fighting a conventional military force, but something entirely different. The humans had turned warfare into a cooperative engineering project, with thousands of people contributing ideas and modifications. The Zephyrian Empire had no defense against organized creativity, offered to share human technology with the aliens. If they were interested in learning new approaches to engineering, he explained that the secret was not advanced science, but applied stubbornness, combined with a willingness to try things that should not work. The Supreme Fleet retreated, after losing over half its ships to weapons that violated everything the galactic hegemony knew about technology. War Master Keth Var sent his final report, recommending that Earth be declared a restricted zone and avoided by all member civilizations. The galactic hegemony voted to establish Earth as a technological anomaly zone, with strict prohibitions against contact or interference. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that could destabilize the foundation of galactic civilization if they were allowed to spread to other worlds. Jake received a medal from the President of the United States, recognizing his contributions to planetary defense. He used the medal as a paperweight while designing Earth's new interstellar defense network. The victory had given him ideas for projects that would protect not just Earth, but any world that wanted to remain independent. The final scene showed Jake training a new generation of creative engineers from around the world, teaching them that the most important principle of human technology was the absolute refusal to accept that something could not be fixed or improved. The key was not advanced education, but practical experience and determination. Jake established training centers in major cities, where volunteers could learn to build impossible devices and modify existing technology beyond its theoretical limits. The curriculum included courses in creative problem-solving, aggressive improvisation, and applied physics violations. Darstone wrote research papers describing the new field of reality-based engineering, but the scientific community was slow to accept conclusions that contradicted fundamental principles. Jake was not concerned with scientific acceptance. He was more interested in building systems that worked regardless of theoretical objections. The human approach to technology began spreading to other worlds as news of Earth victory reached civilizations throughout the galaxy. Species that had been conquered by the hegemony started developing their own improvised pretenses based on human principles. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Jake looked out at the stars and smiled. The aliens had underestimated human determination and paid the price. Now other civilizations would have the chance to learn that advanced technology was not about following rules but about finding better ways to break them. The universe was about to discover what happened when humans decided to share their engineering philosophy. Earth had become the center of a new kind of technological revolution based on the principle that anything could be improved if you were willing to ignore the experts and trust your own creativity. The human way was spreading, and the galaxy would never be the same.